Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this edition of News Talk. My name is Stephanie. I'm so happy to be here with all of you, and I'm joined by David. Hello, David.
Hello, Stephanie. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. As always, we're going to be looking at three hot topics in the news. We want to talk about them, and we want to hear what your thoughts are as well.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the name of this. It's News Talk. We're going to talk about the news, but we want you to talk about it as well. Such a great way to build your vocabulary, talking about topical issues. So we always choose three very different stories. There's something here for everyone.
Indeed. Shall we have a look at the topics?
Absolutely. David, would you like to start?
Yes. Not too difficult a question, this one, but we'd love to hear what you think about it. Which important religious festival ended last week, and how important was it to you?
Absolutely. And if you can tell us or give us any extra information about the traditions that happen, things that you do in your family to celebrate this festival, we would absolutely love to hear about it.
Indeed.
Story number two is very different. We're talking about working hours. And the question is, how many hours a week should we work? So, this is an interesting one because I'm sure lots of you will have strong viewpoints on this.
Yeah. And this again, this is a story that's arisen in the United States. It's a proposal by one of the senators there. We don't think it's going to become law, but it is quite a contentious issue. So it'll be interesting to see what you think. And then finally, our final question is, which city now has a €5, well, that's a clue there, has a €5 entry fee for tourists? What do you think about it? Would you introduce one of these fees for your city? I don't know. Do you live in a tourist city?
I think this is a really interesting topic, and I think there's lots of discussion points here, lots for us to think about. So that's going to be story number three. But let's kick off with our very first story. And the question, there's always a question, which important religious festival ended last week? That's what we'd like to know.
Uh, Thank you, Ali. That's already a really fantastic comment to start us with. It was a very special festival. The children wore new clothes and played with toys. All the families met together and ate special food. That really encapsulates what this celebration, this wonderful, happy celebration was about, I think.
Absolutely. And this is what's great about these kinds of practice sessions because we can really find out what you do and we can share our experiences and what happens in your family. So, Ali, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know, Ali, are you? I presume what maybe you would like to share a bit more about that. I mean, it's a really important festival in our country as well now, isn't it, Stephanie?
I think,
Um,
was it 4 million people celebrating this? I keep saying this festival. We'll reveal the name in a moment. Let's have some guesses for that. But yes, 4 million people celebrating in Britain. And again, as Ali said, I think it's a time for many families coming together for thanks and reflection. It's a time to think and to be thankful.
Yeah, and I think it's celebrated by, is it what, over 1 billion people around the world. That's it's really amazing, and I think, because often we lose sight of the importance, the deep importance of these things, and this is all about um, respect for and love for each other and the foundations of many different religions, actually. So a lot of them are have lots in common, but can also be very different.
So we need some guesses still. Would anyone like to tell us what festival we are in fact talking about? So I can stop calling it a festival. So let's have some guesses, please. I'll give you some more clues. Apparently, enjoying sweet food such as dates is also part of the tradition. And did you know, David, that the date actually changes each year because it's determined by the cycle of the moon. So it's not always on the same date.
I thought that was a fascinating thing. Yes, because quite often people don't know when to start celebrating or ending until till the day itself.
In
Um,
fact, I thought that's a really interesting fact there.
yeah, and also the end can be between 1 and 3 days, I believe. So it's all very fluid.
And of course, a big element of what precedes this is a period of fasting, isn't it? And quite specific, obviously, fasting, a time when you don't eat or drink. So this is exactly, Ali. The people become happy to eat normally after 30 days of fasting.
Yes, they do. And of course, it's a time for reflection as well. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think everybody can appreciate the value of that. But this whole thing of fasting from dawn to sunset every day, I'm not. That's a challenge.
It's a commitment, isn't it? Yes, it's a real commitment. Good guess, but we're not talking about Easter.
But as I do understand it, though, Stephanie, apparently, and I'll please correct me if I'm wrong, but if one day you break the fast, then you can add another day on at the end.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I think.
Perhaps if anybody's watching would like to confirm whether that's true or false. So, David, I think possibly we should reveal what we're talking about.
Yes. So we are talking about the Muslim festival of Ramadan. And of course, it ended with the festival, and I'm sure I will mispronounce it, of Eid al-Fitr.
Thank you. Ali says that's true. There you go, David. So it's true. You can add an extra day on if you somehow missed a day during that period. So yes, as we said, it's a day for thanks, for reflection, and of course, this year perhaps a lot of people reflecting on others in less fortunate circumstances around the world.
Well, indeed. And I think it was interesting some of the messages that came out from our leaders, from our political leaders. So Joe Biden said, that as Muslim families and communities come together for Eid al-Fitr, they are also reflecting on the pain felt by so many. My thoughts are with those around the world enduring conflict, hunger, displacement, including in such places as Gaza and Sudan. And I think our own Prime Minister made a similar kind of statement on Twitter, or X, as we say.
Absolutely. And as is so often with these festivals, you feel thankful for what you got, but you're also mindful of others who are not so fortunate.
Indeed, indeed. And I thought it was also interesting, how if you are a non-Muslim, how if you are with Muslim friends, how you celebrate that. And I think basically, I think it's again, it's a question of being respectful. So you might be eating, but you've got to maybe be a little bit careful of how much and when you eat with your Muslim friends. Or I suspect if you're going to invite them for dinner or something, then you do it after sunset.
Absolutely. Of course, a really great way for people to learn about other cultures and other festivals that people celebrate that are different to their own.
It is indeed. And an interesting question as well, I found, Stephanie. How about this? So we know about the dates that they change according to the lunar calendar. But you know, for so much fasting, do you think people lose weight during Ramadan?
Well, I suppose it depends how much people are consuming once the fast finishes and the sun sets, because perhaps it's just a case of switching the amount you're eating from the daytime into the nighttime. So I suspect possibly not.
You're quite right, because in fact, it disrupts your eating habits, and
Mm.
apparently people gain weight because they eat more after sunset.
Shall we have a look at some of the vocabulary, David?
Absolutely.
Okay, so of course our question was which important festival? And as we said, Muslims in Britain and around the world began celebrating Eid al-Fitr as the holy month of Ramadan comes to an end.
And
There we go, David.
yeah, and as Stephanie mentioned, right, it's a period of fasting, and that's when you eat no food. And of course, our very, very English word breakfast is when you break the fast. It's the time when you stop not eating food in the morning.
That's a fun fact. I hadn't considered that, David. That's very interesting. Our second word, so of course, worshippers observing this tradition. Now, if you're a worshipper, you're someone who goes to a religious ceremony to worship God or a god.
Yeah, and I think as we mentioned, it's this time is a time of reflection, and that's I think it's a lovely word, a noun. It means when you give serious and careful thought to something.
Shall we move on to story number two? As always, it's something completely different for you. We're talking about the working week, but we're considering how many hours a week should we work. I mean, being realistic here, of course, lots of people, obviously would like to have extra holiday, extra days off, but thinking realistically about achieving that balance of being productive, but also having that work-life balance as well.
Yeah, so please tell us, just write the number in. How many hours do you think we should work on a practical level that's going to be productive, but also, is good for our own personal well-being, but we are sufficiently productive as human beings, so we get the balance right. Hi, Joseph. So this, as I said, this story has come from the United States, where Bernie Sanders, one of the senators there, has put forward a bill to establish a shorter working week. Absolutely great point, Amelia. Yeah, we have to work as many hours as we need to live, to pay for our living. Couldn't agree more. Now, the question is that he's saying is that balance right? Because what he says is that today American workers are over 400% more productive than they were in the 1940s, yet millions of Americans are working longer hours for lower wages than they were decades ago. And this has to change, especially now with artificial intelligence. So the question is, how do we reduce the levels of stress that people have and allow our fellow countrymen a better quality of life?
I think you're absolutely right there, Yusuf. I mean, Yusuf saying that where he is, it's 8 hours a day, so 40 hours a week. But in Germany, they've tested, and it's more productive to actually do less. And I think that's the key point, isn't it? It's not about working less; it's about working better, working more effectively, and thinking about instead of fitting that work into perhaps 5 days with a lot of extra time wasting, perhaps being more productive, more efficient, and getting a productive amount of work done in fewer days.
And we've had tests in our country as well with companies, and of the companies, 95% said productivity had stayed
Mm.
the same or improved during a shorter week. So that sounds quite healthy.
Because the other thing is, I think you have happier employees, more motivated, wanting to get the work done. They feel that they've got, as Ali said, got more family time or more time to spend on themselves, on hobbies. They come to work feeling fresher. I mean, I think if you think about when you've had a 3-day weekend, how you feel on a Monday, just having that extra day, it does make a huge difference, doesn't it?
It does. And this whole thing about families is really important, especially when childcare is such an issue in countries like ours, and I expect in many countries where the mother works as well. So not only do you have the additional expense of trying to find somewhere for your child to be looked after, whether it's going to be the mother or the father, but it's very complicated, and it does destroy family time. It interrupts.
And I think it's very, very interesting and very positive that senators and that companies are considering this as a viable option, and are actually prioritising that work-life balance and employees' mental health.
Yeah, great point. However, I mean, one issue that has arisen is the issue of whether companies just expect employees who are on a shorter working week to be as productive and actually work as many hours, but in fewer days. So in your whatever number of days, you just pack in the hours and possibly earn less.
Hello, Francesco. Francesco saying that in Italy, it's usually 40 hours, but if you work in public administration, it goes down to 36. Interesting fact there, Francesco.
Thank you for sharing that. Civil servants. Yes, I think in most countries we think civil servants tend to have more favourable conditions than ordinary people like us.
Work stress leads to errors. Yeah, absolutely, Ali. I think there's, tired employees feeling demotivated, unhappy. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah. Another pro, actually, I found is that of course, if you are working fewer hours or fewer days at least, then we are cutting the carbon footprint because, like during the pandemic, people were traveling and moving around much less.
So lots of good points coming through. Yusuf saying productivity will be higher, and agreeing with Ali. So I think all round everybody's in favour of this idea.
Yeah, so the to answer the question, in this sense, this Bernie Sanders, this senator, his proposal was, I think, as people have mentioned, that we should be working 4 days a week, i.e., 32 hours a week. Wouldn't that be nice?
I think it would be wonderful. I'm totally on board that. Um, David.
Yeah, one point that did come out, because I think Yusuf mentioned, about this, there have been lots of trials with companies, and at the beginning, companies have been really happy and saying productivity is fantastic and all this. However, it seems I found that it is only a short-term gain. Employers are happier, their personal worth and job security, etc. But after a two-year period, nearly all admitted that the improvements had disappeared. It seems to be that the impact of something new is really positive, but after a time, it
You
tends
get
to,
used to it.
yeah, yeah.
And then you want to work a 3-day week.
Yes, please.
Yeah, see, that's the thing, Ali. I mean, it gives you time to actually do things rather than as it currently stands, you've got 2 days. We've all got our normal household errands to run. You've got supermarket shopping, cleaning, all these things that effectively eat up your time off, and it leaves you with not much time to focus on yourself. So I think that's a really good point.
Indeed.
Let's have a look at some of the vocabulary from this topic then. So, how many hours a week should we work? Well, as David mentioned, moving to a 32-hour work week with no loss of pay. It's not a radical idea, it has been around for a long time.
Indeed. Yeah. So, as Mr. Sanders introduced this concept, it is not radical. And radical is something new, different, likely to have a great impact or effect. And this isn't a radical idea.
we talked a lot about productivity, didn't we? About productivity staying the same or increasing. The productivity is the rate at which somebody, could be a person, a company, or a country, does useful work. So if we have a longer time off, we'll increase our productivity in the time we are at work.
Indeed. And we also talked about people's well-being, and your well-being is that state of feeling happy and healthy.
So now to our final story this week. We're asking which city, there's a big clue in the currency, we're talking euros. So which city in Europe has a €5 entry fee for tourists? Type in your answers now, let us know.
Yes, please. And also, do you agree or disagree with this idea? It's a really interesting one, I think. You know
Well, I
that
think
because
mm, I
Stephanie.
was going to say, I think this city is a particular case, isn't it? Because it faces very particular problems, and one of which I think is interesting, is that 80% of tourists that visit this place actually only visit for the day. So they're effectively day trippers, and they spend very little money once they're there.
Indeed. So this is about day trippers, isn't it?
Yes, and it's a charge that's going to be introduced, but not for everybody. Some people will be exempt. You are exempt if you're planning on staying overnight. You're exempt if you're under 14. And also, of course, if you are going there to visit family or indeed to work. So there are certain cases, certain people, groups of people that won't have to pay this fee.
Yeah. Any ideas? What city can it be? It's not the UK, although in the UK there are lots of discussions around this, particularly around London and Manchester. Um, and in fact, I think there are quite a few cities that have introduced a tourist tax for people staying overnight. And the idea here is, of course, is that that it helps pay for the maintenance of the infrastructure of the city.
Absolutely. And you might be wondering how this city is going to introduce this. Well, of course, it's going to be digital. You have to register in advance. So you have to let them know you're planning on coming. And you have to, once you've paid, obtain a QR code online. And then once you're in the city, yes, it's a fee for entering the specific city, Amelia. Once you're in, there are going to be police and authorized inspectors are going to be carrying out random checks. So they'll come up to you and ask to see your QR code to prove that you have in fact paid.
Yeah, and indeed. Oh, I'm back. And indeed, they've got these inspectors, and you can be fined up to €300 if you
Mm.
haven't paid your five euro fee.
Francesco giving us a hint there. It's in the north of Italy. And Francesco, in fact, went there yesterday. And a lot of people are very annoyed by tourists. It could be difficult to live there. And I certainly agree. I live in a tourist place in the UK, and I have to say, as a local, in the summertime, it can be a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, yeah. But then, of course, on the other side, do we want to potentially discourage tourism? There is an issue. We have an issue in many cities of over tourism, but again, how do we get the balance?
I think when it becomes a case of damaging the area and damaging the city, and there's just too many people, perhaps that's something that's a whole different consideration.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us which city is it? Somebody, please.
I think Amelia guessed it already, didn't she? Yes, Amelia has guessed.
Thank you. Yes, yes. So it is Venice, and it is this particular issue, as Stephanie said, because of the very fragile lagoon there. And I think the city in 2021 banned cruise ships.
Mm,
But also, what I was quite shocked at is how many people now no longer live in Venice.
mm.
The population from a peak of 175,000 is now down to about 50,000. And apparently, if you get too few people, then a city itself is not sustainable. It just can't manage.
And I think this is the point here. I think with Venice, it's such a particular city that the lagoon is incredibly fragile. It's not in, the city, the location is not intended, it's simply not built to cope with huge cruise ships, with this influx of tourists coming in. So I think it is a very specific and particular situation. And also, from what I can understand, though, Francesco, perhaps you can correct me if I'm wrong, this charge it's not all season, is it? It's just in particular busy periods such as the spring and summer, unless I'm mistaken.
Ah, okay. But it is, and again, it's because they've got such a high proportion, as you say, of day trippers. And day trippers are not the most popular with any city because they come, they visit, they don't spend much money, and they go. Cities like people to stay overnight for one night or two nights and spend money in the local economy.
Exactly. And as we mentioned, if you do stay overnight, then you are in fact exempt from the charge. So you won't have to pay it if you become an overnight guest.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, huge numbers of tourists. Ali, you mentioned there. I mean, Venice, 20 million tourists a year in that
Mm.
tiny city. So of course, then the city has to live with the congestion, the environmental damage, and the effects of the lifestyle and culture on the people who actually do live there.
So Francesco, thank you, saying that he thinks I'm right. It's not always. I mean, I think I read it was on 30 particularly busy days during spring and summer. Um, and I think the idea is that it is intended to protect the city a bit from this kind of mass tourism.
Yeah, and I think the mayor of Venice has tried to say that to hold that message that yes, this is about supporting the city. They don't want to discourage tourists, but they just want to get the right balance. And I mean, I know, for example, in Barcelona, you pay a tourist tax when you stay in a hotel overnight, and I believe other places like Thailand and Slovenia, I see that they also charge tourism taxes. Does anybody else live in a city that has a tourist tax or thinks it's a good idea?
Exactly. So do let us know. I mean, I think this, as we said, it's a very particular example because it's also about protecting the region and the area. Maria says charging a fee could impact tourism if tourists perceive the fee as excessive or unjustified. It could lead to negative reviews and publicity.
Excellent point. Yes, indeed, and I think that's spot on, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Let's have a look at some vocabulary here then. So, yes, we are talking about Venice, and the mayor revealed the details on Thursday of this new €5 fee for day trippers. So, as we said, this is specifically for people only going for the day.
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? And there we've got all the tourists waiting to board the gondola for a trip around the canals, even around the canals. Lovely. Um, and as we said, part of the reason is because of the fragile nature of the lagoon in Venice. And fragile means, it's easily destroyed or damaged. It's a bit vulnerable.
The second word, we've got it here as a noun, exemption. You heard me say to be exempt. Certain people, certain groups of people are exempt. If you are exempt from something, you have special permission not to do or not to pay something.
Indeed. And we also talked about the people who were going to enforce this this new fee, these inspectors. And if you enforce something, then you make people obey a law or a rule. You make a particular situation happen or be accepted. Oh, and I think that's a nice point there as well. Thank you, Youssef. If you're planning to visit Petra, which I did many, many, many years ago and was fantastic, you have to pay a low fee to enter the historical city. Again, it's a tourist fee.
Good. Well, that brings us to the end of our news talk for this week. Really interesting topics there, and lots of great vocabulary that you can see being used in context, which, as I always say, is so important.
Indeed. So thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again next week for 3 new topics.
Absolutely, 3 brand new topics.
Have a good
You're welcome, Ali. We're pleased you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.
bye bye.